All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Scott Arrieta. I'm the CEO of Unity and Company, and today's session is a super exciting one, especially if you care about what's possible in education when leadership, community, and purpose align. I'm joined by somebody I deeply respect, Russ Warwick. He's the head of our education division here at Unity and Company. Russ brings a wealth of experience as a school leader, systems thinker, and transformational coach, and he's now leading our work to support schools, districts, and educational organizations across the country. This is going to be much more of an informal conversation than a presentation. We're going to talk about why we launched an educational division, what kind of work we're doing with schools, and most importantly, what's possible when educators are supported as whole people and schools are treated as living systems. So whether you're a superintendent, a principal, or someone who just cares about the future of education, we hope that this conversation gives you a clear sense of how we think, how we work, and how we might support the transformation already happening in your community. So with that, I'd love to dive in. Russ, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, why don't we just start off our conversation today? Could you just tell us a little bit about your background and then what brought you into this work?
Sure. So I am a 21-year veteran in education. Started out teaching high school literature for 7 years at an at-risk high school, and then transitioned to an assistant principal for a few years, was quickly promoted to a principal in the Denver metro area, served as principal in the Denver metro area at, again, at-risk school for 11 years. I'm currently working with administrative support with a pretty larger sized charter school in the northeastern area of Colorado. And I'm also pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership. I am nearly done with my comprehensive exam, so yay. And I'm studying really the impact of new managerialism on the role of the principal, which is nerd speak for, how corporate structures kind of impact educational leaders. And how I got into this work was almost by accident, providence maybe, I don't know. I never set out to become an educator. And I guess I was in college, and it was the early 2000s, and I had lived through an illness with my mother that almost took her, and the Columbine shooting. I was in high school, and we were in the middle of the war on terror, and I had a very negative worldview at the time. Very heavy metal guy, wore a lot of black, So I'm sitting on this train from Florence, Italy to Assisi, Italy, and we were out there visiting some long-lost relatives. And, I was commiserating about the world at the time and, how negative the world that I lived in and how rotten people were and all that. And I was listening to Tool's The Grudge on the Lateralus album. Best album ever.
Yep.
And, it's a song about surrendering your grudges. And the thought popped into my head of, maybe the world's not such a rotten place. Maybe I'm just a jerk and it's treating me like a jerk. And so at that time, I'd been considering like maybe going into law school or something. I had an English major and a philosophy minor. And I decided, no, I do not want to be that. I want to be of service to the world, but I didn't really know how. So I got out of college, waited tables, because that's what a person with a major in English literature and a minor in philosophy does before the world of podcasting. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, do you want to try substitute teaching just until you kind of figure your life out? And I said, sure, $100 a day sounds fantastic. And so I found my first gig at a very at-risk school that was going through turnaround efforts. I had no idea what those were. And I was intimidated. I came in, it was a tough place. All the impacts of poverty were on that place. And I was not used to that setting at all. But I found that I absolutely loved the kids and they loved me. And I think we were all surprised about that. And so I ended up serving as kind of a long-term sub at this high school. And the administrators liked me and said, do you want to do an alternative licensure program? We'd love to have you as an English teacher. And I said, okay. So I did that and, quickly became department chair and like an avid coordinator and stuff in this Denver Metro high school. And then they tapped me on the shoulder again and said, hey, have you ever thought about being a principal or being an assistant principal? And I was like, you mean like Seymour Skinner with the necktie and everything, the purple necktie? And I said, well, okay, I'll check it out. So I got my master's. At the time when I was teaching high school, it was really fulfilling. It was a lot of fun. I was getting really good at it. It was 7 years in, but it felt like kind of bailing the ocean out with a teacup. Had all these really at-risk kids coming to me at 16, 17 years old. They had bad attendance, and they might have been running with a crew, and they might have been, experimenting in drugs and that kind of thing. It's really hard to turn kids around at that age. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So I thought maybe I should check out elementary because I could impact them when they were young. And then by the time they get to high school, they have good habits, and they're going to be more successful. So I applied for a AP role at a large elementary school in the Denver metro area, similar demographics. I did 2 years there, and they thought I was pretty good. And so they said, "Hey, what do you want to take over this little elementary school, K-5?" And I said, sure. And little did I know that their ratings were not so great. They had had a bounce in success. We can talk about that in a little bit, about what that is. But they had received some support for a turnaround effort, and it had gone well for a year or two. But then when that support went away, the scores fell again. So I found myself as a first year principal at like 31 or something. And I had a turnaround school on my hands. And so I worked there for 11 years, and we were able to turn that school around. I could talk a little bit more about that later. But that's kind of my journey so far through educational leadership. And that's really the reason that I'm doing this, is because I really care about improving people's lives, especially kids.
Well, I mean, it's certainly clear that you've seen a lot and have had a lot of opportunities to not just work with kids as learners, but also work with organizations so that you can create the conditions necessary for success within those academic institutions. So, I mean, you might have already touched on some of this, but I do think I want to ask you, what is it that really drives your passion for supporting school transformation work? Because I can imagine it can be really challenging to do.
Yeah, it's incredibly challenging, definitely. But what drives my passion for it is just having lived it. When you actually see the impact of turning a school around on the community, on the kids, on the parents, on the teachers, like, it's spine-tingly good. I mean, it is really morally, spiritually, everything. It feels fantastic. There's a moral purpose behind it that is super important to me, but there is also, a need that I feel that turnaround work is hard, and I want people to be like successful at it because it can be done. It's just difficult to pull off, and it helps to have somebody that has done it and that can lead you through it, to make, everybody's lives happy, from the principal. He or she is coming to work and feeling successful and seeing their impact and feeling good about work. The teachers, the kids are being successful, and it can even have an impact on, like the community at large. In my personal case, when I took over this building, kids were coming kind of in and out, high transition rates. So you would turn over a lot of kids, in weird times during the school year, like November, December. So it was very transitory kind of community. Impacted by Title I, 40% of the kids were learning English as a second language. And the school was really failing. And what happens in that situation is that people start leaving. And then districts are faced with, what do we do with this building now? It's too expensive to run. And, we're going to have to shut it down. Well, that can have an impact on the community, because you can get like urban blight. Like, all of a sudden you have to shutter a school. Like, it just ripples out and has this enormous impact. So if you can like turn that school around and create a thriving hub for the community that serves the community, like, it's just goodness that radiates throughout that area. So that's really like why I'm so passionate about it. Is it is primarily students, but it's also like doing so much communal good to create successful and thriving schools. And I strongly believe that no matter what the setting is, you can do it. And it's hard, but it can be done.
Yes, I think what you're outlining here, it sounds like it is truly, a holistic and comprehensive challenge that has ripple effects throughout not just the individual lives of the learners, but everybody that comes in touch with them and in contact with them. One of the things that I want to revisit, so you mentioned working at a school that was in need of turnaround work, but you weren't aware of it at the time because they were in a bounce phase. Can you talk a little bit more about what the bounce means?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. What happens a lot in a turnaround setting is that you have a school that's struggling with growth and achievement, right? That's the metric that we measure on. So the way a school becomes a quote unquote turnaround school is that they take state assessment data for grades 3 through 10. That's going to be in the state of Colorado, it's CMAS, but it's pretty, it's pretty generalized structure across the different states in America. And then for the older grades, it's the ACT or SAT scores and dropout rates and graduation rates, all those other things, attendance rates. And so they bell curve, at least in Colorado, this is certainly what they do. They bell curve the performance of these schools. And if you are in the lower, 15th percentile or so, you are given a designation of either turnaround or priority improvement status. And so that is the state coming in and signaling to you that you need to make some changes because your students are falling behind. So that typically triggers some grant money that comes in, and you're typically paired with somebody to help you with those turnaround efforts, which can be great and can do a lot. But what typically happens is that the support comes in, changes are made, and the scores come up, and then they get out of that rating, and then the support goes, and then the school falls back down. So you get this bounce effect. And so it can feel like there's always these group of schools that are going kind of back and forth across this line, and it's really frustrating for everybody involved. So that was the case of the building that I took over. And so how we were able to change that is, through, a total team effort. I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I was, leading transformationally. We passed an innovation plan. We did some things. We brought in world languages. We brought in a travel program. We expanded the school out from a pre-K 5 to a pre-K 8, so we could capture some of that transitory community. So we were giving them a home for their kids for 12 years or so, which is a great incentive for them to stay there, and it gave them a safe place to come to school and gave them all these really cool educational opportunities. And those permanent changes, what was enabled us to sustain a performance rating, which is the top one you can get, for 7 years. So you can kind of measure success, turnaround success, not so much by what a school does in a year, 2 years. That can be a bounce. What you want is not a bounce, but a launch, where you're continually carrying on that success, changing that community, and getting kids up to to where they can perform, no matter what boundaries are in their way early on in their life. The school, this particular school, I was really proud of, because we had students that came in that were behind grade level, typically in K1, 2. Some were recent immigrants that had never seen a school, let alone an American school. They were unfamiliar with letters, and some of them could barely spell their names. And so we would get these students at a very young age, and through a lot of work and a lot of intervention, by the time they made it to middle school, so 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they were not only growing at the 55th, 60th, 65th percentile in reading and mathematics, but their achievement in Colorado, the mean score for achievement to get into like this student's competent is a score of about 750 in reading. I think it's 745 in math. But those students were achieving that level on the mean throughout the entire all 3 grades. So these kids with that came from very challenging backgrounds were performing just as well as their more privileged and affluent counterparts in places like Jefferson County and Adams 12. And so that's the real success, is creating not that bounce, but a continuation of just high achievement, high growth. So that's the difference there.
The thing that really comes to mind, Russ, as you kind of talk about the interventions that you did at that school, is just how fundamentally you changed the trajectory of the lives of those kids from being sub-achievement level to achieving at that level, and then how you've effectively installed an infrastructure that helps generations of kids moving into the future to achieve at that same level. So I think the impact of the work that you're driving is something really, really significant.
Well, the only place I'd correct you is that it was we. It wasn't me. I had an incredible team of teachers. I mean, it's, by fate, fortune, providence. I just found these eclectic group of individuals that, really wanted to support a turnaround effort, and they got in there and they dug and they pushed back on me when they needed to push back. We had very low turnover, almost none. Several years we had nobody leave, and that team just stuck together. And I'm still really close with that team, talk with them all the time. My family are friends with many of them. So like being in the trenches together, you really do bond. And that's another important thing about turnaround is attracting the right kind of team that's going to support that entire effort. So a little addendum there, but I was supported by fantastic people. And my district supported me too. I mean, they let me run with the ball, and that's critical too. Districts need to support innovation when these principals are trying to turn these buildings around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the nudge there, Russ. But what I will say, just kind of bringing it back to you and your excellence, right? I love the fact that you called out the contributions of your team and how instrumental they were into actually executing on the results that you were able to see. And we see this at Unity and Company too when we work with corporations and organizations, right? The leaders who are the most effective are not just the leaders who are individually the most competent, but they're the leaders who are able to catalyze growth, transformation, engagement, productivity from everybody around them, regardless of the room that they're in, right? And so that piece of credit, I do think, needs to be solidly kept in your court. I think it takes a special type of leader to take an eclectic group of, very diverse individuals and galvanize them around a common mission and get them rowing in the same direction. But I also think it takes a special kind of leader to recognize that it's not all about you, right? It is about, how effectively you can create consensus, create a shared mission, create a shared vision, and deploy people against that, right? And I think that just reinforces one of the many reasons that we've chosen you to lead the education division here at Unity, is because you not only obviously have such a depth of knowledge and expertise with regards to school administration and organization and turnaround work, but also a heart for people and an ability to work with teams that's really resonant with the Unity brand. Now,
Absolutely.
It occurs to me that some of our listeners might not be super familiar with the term school turnaround work. We've been talking about it a lot. So can you just define it really quickly? And then also, why do you feel like it's so critical right now?
That's a great question, because typically turnaround can have a negative connotation in education, right? And it exists in the corporate world too, is that you need to course correct. Right. Something needs to change, and it's a big change. So it can have that negative connotation, but it doesn't need to. We've talked kind of pragmatically about the necessity for turnaround is, like the state is coming in and they're insisting on different results, right? And we've talked about the moral necessity for that. The kids are not performing at the level that they should be. And we've talked about even the community effect of that when schools are not functioning well, it has a ripple effect all around us, right? Even the businesses that are hiring the graduates, that's going to impact them as well. So there's a bunch of those really kind of stress points that need to be addressed through turnaround. But it's equally important for people that are not in that situation. So for example, if say you're an improvement school, so that's a yellow rating. So you're more on the 40th or 35th percentile, as far as your results go. But you want to get better. You're not under any intense pressure from the state, or, typically even the districts wants some change, but it's, nothing's on fire, so to speak. But you want to get better. You want to get up to that magical green rating, that performance rating. Whatever you think of those ratings, it does measure quantitatively what you're doing. And so all of those methods that you employ when you're turning around a school, I mean, they're deployable in any setting. I don't care if you were a comfortably green school. I'm kind of reminded of the spirit of Kaizen, right? Japanese term for continuous improvement. That's why it's important work. So no matter where you are, and I've worked with schools that are not, in that red and orange category, that just want to improve. And you can deploy all those methods that we do at Unity into making a good thing even better. So that's why no matter where you're sitting as a building leader right now, you should consider some turnaround efforts in your building, because there's always ways to improve and ways to get better. And there's no reason not to do it. It's fun, actually, when you start doing it. So that's why I think it's so critical.
Well, so with regards to that, with the school turnaround work that you've done, what are some of the most common challenges that you're seeing that schools are facing when they're attempting turnaround efforts?
There's two big ones. The first one is option paralysis. So if you are in a turnaround situation, you've got a school that is failing, quote unquote. It doesn't matter how you feel about that. It just that's where you're being judged. That's where you're being viewed. Typically, the environment looks like this. You have high discipline. You have parents that are upset about the performance of the school. The morale tends to be low among the teachers. The principal is, working 70, 80 hours a week and is very stressed. And you've got high, absenteeism among the kids and possibly the staff. It doesn't feel good. It feels like everything is on fire and you don't know where to start. So that's typically like set one of problem that I see. Set two is in how people go about trying to solve all these things at once, right? So they typically do throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at everything and try to fix everything at once. And that tends to create too many initiatives, not enough follow through, and it feels chaotic. And so there's either this frozen problem where we don't know what to do, or we're all scrambling around, trying to put out all these fires in all these different areas, and everybody is getting frustrated. So that's like that's a common challenge that happens a lot with turnaround. And there's some solutions to it. What really needs to happen is that the first thing that you do, educators tend to think of, well, I need to go and I need to make sure and I'm going to throw some jargon. I'm sorry if you're not in this world, but my MTSS processes and my PLCs and my data analysis, and we need to roll in some new curriculum and we need to, change the way we assess and all these different great ideas, right? That all could work. And they haven't addressed the feelings of safety and security in the school. And if you don't do that, forget it. You can come up with the greatest thing in the world and it's not going to stick because nobody feels safe in the school. So your first solution there in turnaround is to make sure everybody feels safe. That can feel daunting, but it's actually something you can do in a few weeks at the beginning of the school year. And it's just like common expectations, common code of conduct, consistent follow through around disciplinary measures, clear communication with parents, and your Likert scale surveying your students, your staff, your parents, everybody to make sure your efforts are working. And the metric that you really want to look for is you want 80 to 85% of your K-5 kids to say, I feel safe and cared for at school. I have a trusting adult. You'll never get 100, obviously, but you want that number to be overwhelmingly high, K through 5. And however you get that data from kindergartners, that can be a little tricky. But for middle school, that's going to be a little bit lower because it's developmentally different. There's a lot of identity work that happens with kids that are 12, 13, that kind of thing. So those numbers will be a little lower, around 75% maybe. But you want to look for data coming from your staff and your parents and your students that the place is safe and orderly and we can send them there. Then you get to jump into all those other things that you want to do. But a lot of times everybody tries to do everything at once and they kind of trip over themselves doing it. So that's the biggest problem I've seen.
I love how regimented your approach is in determining the appropriate scope and sequence of tasks and initiatives in order to really bring about the transformation that the school needs. Going into the next question here, Russ, I've already heard pieces of this in your previous responses, namely that safety is paramount and a foundation before you can really start to drive innovation and change. This idea of boiling the ocean, lighting too many fires, and having to become a firefighter. These are all things that very tangibly impact organizational leaders as well within the corporate space, which is where a lot of the Unity and Company team plays. But I want to ask you this question a little bit more on the nose. So Unity and Company is at its heart a corporate leadership development firm, full service in that space. And so how does Unity's approach to leadership development, team alignment, and systems thinking, how does that translate into the education space?
That's a really cool question. Typically, what people try to do when they're coming in to a turnaround effort, one of the go-to things, like if you think about those human resources styles of leadership, laissez-faire, authoritarian, pragmatic, transactional, right? A lot of times what the building leader will do is say, this place needs whipped into shape. I've got to come in and I've got to drill down and I've got to get this place under control and kind of iron fist it a little bit. So the reason why that doesn't tend to work is that the staff and the students are already emotionally they're already way up here, and you're coming down with more kind of fear-based kind of thou must kind of dictates from the leader, and so it just frustrates the entire system. And so what's really cool about Unity is that all the leaders I've spoken to at Unity are more in that human resources lens. They're transformational. And that's the style of leadership that is, I won't say you need, but is most successful in a turnaround effort. You have to go in. A little bit of charisma helps, but it's not absolutely necessary. It's about building a team, empowering leaders within your building, using consultative decision-making methods where you're getting input from everybody, and building this kind of ground up kind of effort to turn the trajectory of the school, because it doesn't matter how willful the leader is, there's not enough willfulness in the universe to turn a school around. It's a hard thing to do. You need a lot of people, and you need everybody, to your earlier metaphor, rowing in the same direction. And so Unity is just so uniquely positioned to give that kind of support, to show school leaders how to do that. And most importantly, to step away. That's part of transformational leadership, right? You build the capacity within the people and then you fade away because you're trying to transform. So I think that's what makes Unity really stand out, is that a lot of time consulting groups will want to come in, and this is really common in education. When consultants come in, the teachers will complain, well, the consultants are running the building now. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes they have a really regimented thing that they really want done, and they really want done a specific way. And that's not transformational. That's going to get you that bounce, right? Because as soon as those structures go out that nobody really bought into in the first place, you're back down. And so if you can build the capacity, and you want people creating their own things, right? And that is going to work for them. Schools are incredibly local. Every school has a different feel and a different flavor. And so transformational consultants can come in and say, here are the raw materials you are working with. Let's help you build something. And so that's why Unity is just so cool. So that's why I think it's a perfect fit.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's why we think that you're a perfect fit for the team, Russ. We're very excited about the work that you're doing here in this space, because I do think that, this is where leadership starts. One of the things that Unity and Company, our slogan, is that we focus on a strategic understanding of human experiences in order to drive results. And these are where those human experiences are really cultivated and grown, is in the education setting. And so I think the work that you are doing is really helping to create those conditions that help the next generation of leaders to really step into their power. Now, you mentioned a little bit about our methodology and our uniqueness and the resonance with the core work that we do here at Unity. What makes those things so different from other school improvement vendors who are out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, immediately as I've done it, I can't speak to what other vendors have or haven't done, but I know what I've done. So, and I've been through all stages of the turnaround effort. So what makes us a unique fit here is that we have insider, outsider kind of scopes on the work, right? So I'm going to know the inner workings of a school. I'm going to get that feeling, and I'm still working in schools, right? It's not like I'm, doing, working in corporations all the time or anything. I'm still working full time in schools. And so I get all of the little things that folks from outside of that vocation may not understand at all. And so that's going to help, because in specific instances, I'm going to have that experience, right? But we also have this outside kind of corporate methodologies that work really well in other organizations, and a school is just an organization, right? And in many senses, it functions similarly to a business. And there's a lot of those procedures and protocols, standard operating procedures that work really effectively in schools. In fact, within within senior leadership, they talk about, Bowman and Deal and all the other corporate corporate authors that folks in the business world talk about too. Good to great, that. So, that fit is already there. Where we come in is that we have that ability to, work with the personal building of capacity, understanding lived experience, understanding the day-to-day experiences of teachers and principals and even district leaders. So that's what kind of sets us apart, is that unique kind of inside outside view of the function of a school.
Mm-hmm. I'd imagine that at this point in the conversation, there are a lot of school administrators, superintendents who are really excited about what you're talking about and the potential that the work that you do could have for their school and their kids and their community. But let's talk about where the rubber meets the road, which is funding. How do schools pay for this? So can you explain how schools typically fund this kind of work and how leaders can access those resources so that they can start a conversation with you about this stuff?
Well, I mean, that's the good news, is that there typically isn't a shortage of funding. So there are, local, state, and nonprofit sources of funding, particularly for anybody that's in that turnaround setting. In fact, like most of the time, it's released as part of a turnaround effort from maybe CDE or somebody, or, there's a college partnership that wants to do something around this. So the problem usually isn't, I'm not sure how to fund this. The problem usually is, here's the money. How do I spend it in a way that is responsible, ethical, and is going to get you and the community, the taxpayer, the results that they want? So it's a huge topic. There's a ton of different funding sources out there. But, the bigger decision, I think, for educational leaders to make is, who do you invest the resource in? And, who can actually deliver you results? And I think that's more of the critical question than, where's the money going to come from?
So hopefully by this point, our audience has decided that you're the person they want to work with and that money is available to work with you. So that being said, the next question is, why now? Like, why is now a particularly strategic moment for districts to invest in this kind of support?
I'd say now is critical. So this and all the educators will know why, but I'll say it anyway. A school year is, one, I used to joke that it's like a dog year. Feels like it's 7 years long. And two, it has a very identifiable cycle. And for example, my father worked for Ball Metal for 35 years. And at Ball Metal, they manufacture beverage cans. And they do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. And their work always pretty much looks the same, right? They may expand in places or what have you, but their task is to make cans. And that's what they do. And they do it very, very well. Education does not work like that. Education in August is way different than education in the winter, which is way different than March and April. And the testing cycle is way different than the summer. Most of the time during the school year, you do not have time to stop and to have a thought partner. It is very difficult to do. That's why principals and building leadership or district leadership, they tend to work, a nice week is 50 hours. It's usually more than that during that school year. It's very intense. There's a lot of things coming at you. And a lot of times it is making micro decisions in the moment and responding to issues, right? Well, it's very hard to come up with strategic planning for 1 year, let alone 1 year, for like 3 years during that kind of intense workflow. The time to do it is in the summer months, when once the kids exit, once the teachers exit, you have your leadership team that is there, typically through mid-June or sometimes they come back mid-July. That is the time to stop and to breathe and to think. And it's the time to have somebody there to help you think and plan. I cannot imagine having, worked in the leadership part of education 13 years, trying to do any kind of substantive changes in October. The train's already left. You're off rolling and you're dealing with human behaviors. So you want to stop and think now and have a partner to think with in these summer months and set up a plan, whether it's big, small, or in between, right? Because you won't get an opportunity to do it once the little guys come in through the door, you're off to the races, and you need to know which way you're pointed.
Absolutely. Now is the window. Okay, so, let's say that there are listeners in the audience who've decided that they would like to start talking to you about working with you. What's the menu of services that our education division person will provide?
Yeah, I mean, kind of blue sky. Anything's customizable. I can see a few different scenarios in my mind. First would be, let's say you're a third or fourth year principal. You've got not so great data set, but you're doing okay. And you really need some kind of leadership, mentoring, coaching, those kind of things. Now, the reason why I'm touching on this one first is that the role of a building leader is incredibly lonely. You're at the top of the structure and you're supervising everybody beneath you. And it's not like you have a co-principal to lean on typically. You have an assistant, but that's a subordinate. And so a lot of times what districts will try to do is they'll try to assign you a mentor that's either your director or another director that doesn't directly supervise you. But that's not really a safe mentoring and coaching relationship, right? Because it's your supervisor. You're not going to be totally vulnerable with them, and they are evaluating your performance. So that relationship is never really going to work. And even if it's another director, they're in contact with your supervisor, right? So there's always going to be that little bit of a layer of tension, even between two people that get along famously. It's always going to be there. And what do you do if your district rolls out an initiative that you're lukewarm on, or that you're not sure you can support, or how you can support it, how you can deliver on what you need to deliver on? You need somebody to talk to in order to help you work through that. And a lot of times what other principals will do is that I'll network, and networking's great. And I'll talk to my other principal friends. Well, principals are all typically type A, highly competitive people. And so you're not necessarily going to get the kind of honest and authentic feedback from that group. You may, but you may not. And other people will talk with friends, family, folks like that. Those people don't want to hurt your feelings. So you may not get the best guidance from them either. And they may not want to point out when you're about to make a mistake. Having a person that is committed to being a confidant and is hired for that purpose is going to give you real, genuine, authentic coaching and guidance. And it's going to be a safe person to confide in. And so that's a very real service that a lot of principals need. I wish I would have had. I had some great friends and mentors, but I would have loved an outside perspective on what I was doing because I made plenty of mistakes. And, that's a service we can definitely do. Another service might be, how do I strengthen my, PLC cycles? That's professional learning communities, teachers working together on, how to instruct and assess students. How do I make that system more tight? How do I improve when I'm pulling my beginning of year, middle of year, end of year? How can I interpret that data? How I've got these survey results back from my parent community and my staff. How do I qualitatively code that data to pull out themes in which I can act on? And how can I trust myself not to be biased in that process? That's another thing that we can provide. A lot of times buildings struggle with it's called a walkthrough. It's a quick way of, within 5 to 7 minutes, of capturing quantitative and qualitative data within a classroom to tell you how well that teacher is instructing and how well students are learning. It's like a tiny little mixed method study. And how do I do that effectively and pull real trends and data out of that? I built an entire evaluation system on that process, issuing the traditional 2 times a year, I'm going to sit in this classroom for 45 minutes and try to, evaluate this person's performance. I can help with evaluation cycles that way. And so those are, kind of smaller packages that we can certainly do. And then but we've talked extensively about turnaround. Yeah, a turnaround relationship is going to look much more hands-on. That's going to be in-person support in key points of the year. That's going to be all of those things that I just mentioned, right? And that could be a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year relationship potentially. And that's going to be a gradual release of all the good transformational leadership things that we do at Unity, and transferring that knowledge and wisdom over to that building leader, and then having them own it and being able to run with it for the rest of their career. And so that's certainly an option too. That's the one that, really gets me excited. The other stuff is great too. Yeah, there's any number of things that we can do to help support.
And, here at Unity, we really pitch ourselves as being the strategic partners to the clients that we serve, because we do not enter a market unless we have been the leaders in the rooms that we are trying to consult in, right? And so, you are one of the foremost kind of minds with regards to school turnaround work, definitely here within the Colorado area. You have deep experience in that stuff. And this signature turnaround package where we stay engaged with you throughout the year is really kind of the Rolls Royce of the offerings, right? Now, I'm sure that, some of our audience, might be listening to this and saying, well, there's only one Russ Warwick, and we're interested in contracting with them and getting these kind of services. How much work is he really going to be able to do? So would you like to talk a little bit more just about the team you've assembled and how that can help us to scale the work that we do with more clients?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what they're going for. A full turnaround package, I'm able to manage a couple schools that way. Building out a larger team, it's kind of, meeting the demands. There's certainly folks that I've been talking with that are eager to come on board. And when that all starts, that's when we deploy those resources out to those places. Folks I'm talking to come from all different backgrounds of educational leadership, from secondary down to little guys. So we've got a team behind us that can help support larger size job if we absolutely need to. But I've got plenty of bandwidth to take on a couple of buildings myself, and I'm happy to do it.
Excellent. All right. So we've talked a little bit about, the work you do and things like that. I'd like to zoom out a little bit, Russ, and really kind of talk about what's your overall vision for this work over the next 3 to 5 years?
What I would love is to be able to build out a robust team that helps in as many different school districts, both from urban to rural, and to help wherever the help is needed. My motivation for doing this is that the job of the building leader is stressful and lonely and can seem really hard. And the impact of a struggling school is painful and detrimental really to everybody involved in it. Nobody wants to be struggling. And I just hate to see people suffer. And so we can come in and provide that guidance to them and provide that and help turn these communities around. I mean, there really is no reason not to do it. So it would be my dream to be able to just, totally impact education starting in Colorado, because that's what I'm super familiar with at the moment. But, sky's the limit as far as helping schools thrive. If we can catch kids in the first 18 years of their lives and give them a healthy foundation, then, our next generations are going to thrive, no matter where they start. And that's what I'd like to build out. And I'm excited to do it and want to see it through to fruition. Absolutely.
Us too, Russ. We're so excited for the work that you and your team are going to do in this area. As we close our time together, I wanted to ask you one thing, which is, what is one thing that you wish that every school leader understood about transformational change?
So I think that, I'm going to mix my metaphors a little bit here. I think I might have talked about being Merlin to an Arthur somewhere along the line here. That's a metaphor I like to use. A good consultant is going to come in and be Merlin to your Arthur, right? And is going to help, support you when you need it, do a little bit of magic, but they're going to fade away as you don't need them. But when you're truly trying to transform something, particularly in a turnaround setting, you can feel like Dante in the Inferno a little bit. It's, you're lost in the woods. You're all by yourself. There's strange predatory animals chasing you, and, things can look pretty bleak. And they don't have to, though. If you've got a good Virgil, a good guide with you, can help you. The only way out is through, right? You got to keep turning left. But, a good guide can help you with all that, keep your spirits up, show you where the funny stuff is. If you've ever read, Old English Teacher, Habits Die Hard. But it used to teach that one. The kids loved it. But, you can point out the humorous parts of it and just kind of keep them moving and keep them going through it. And no matter who you go with, and no matter where you are in your educational leadership journey, so to speak, in the Jungian sense, it's good to have a mentor and a guide. And so that's what I think we can provide. And no matter where you are and what you're trying to transform, that is going to be essential for you getting your work done. And that's what I really want to help you with.
Now, Russ, if after listening to everything that you've shared so far, an audience member is interested in reaching out to you and beginning the conversation of how you might work together, what's the best way for them to reach you?
You can definitely reach out via LinkedIn if that's where you're viewing this right now. That's absolutely fine. And if you need to contact me, emails probably the best. Russell at Unity and Company, and I'm sure we'll provide that in the links and everything. But yeah, just reach out and let me know that you're interested. I mean, I'm happy to pick up the phone and do a phone call with you, and walk you through different potentials. Just let me know, and I'm at your service.
Absolutely. Well, Russ, I want to thank you so much for spending the time here with us today to outline the launch of our new education division, the services you offer, your areas of competency, and how we can help educational leaders who are in the midst of turnaround work. And if you are interested in reaching out to us for this work, as Russ said, best way to reach out is to reach out to him directly at russell@unityandcompany.com. Can also reach out to either he or I on LinkedIn. Or if you'd like more general information on Unity and Company and our offerings, you can reach out to info@unityandcompany.com as well. Thanks so much.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time.